Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to this session. You know, we have the after-lunch session, so we'll try and keep it high energy so you don't take a nap. It's great to be here. My name is Chris Miller. I have, no offense, Kerry, what I believe is one of the best jobs in the world. I lead the sort of advocacy and activism work at Ben & Jerry's. I am fortunate to have come from Burlington, Vermont in the US, where our corporate headquarters is based, and I lead a team of about a dozen campaigners that sit within our for-profit ice cream company in our 10 largest markets. My background is in policy and advocacy. I spent a bunch of years leading the climate change campaign at Greenpeace US. I started my career working for Bernie Sanders. I am not a trained marketing or business professional. I get to work with people who are.
Hi, I'm Kerry Thorpe. I lead the integrated communications at Ben & Jerry's. I joined the company 8 years ago, and of course I get to talk about flavor news or cookie dough or lobby to change the name to Ben & Kerry's. But I also get to do the part of the job that I love the most, which is using the tools and channels and platform and voice that Ben & Jerry's has to drive our fans to take action and drive systemic change in the world.
So we're going to start by setting up a little context for our conversation. I think we want to talk a little bit about the importance and opportunity of brands and companies taking a stand, both the risks and the rewards. But before we start with the context, a question.
So put your hands up if you think people should not at all be aware or actively attentive to societal issues. Okay, so no hands. That was a good start. And that's because that's the dictionary definition of what it means to be woke. So we feel at Ben & Jerry's it's time to really celebrate, lean in, and own this definition of woke, and to recognize our responsibility to be aware of societal issues, to awaken our consciousness to them, because only by doing that can we drive forward progressive change.
So there are some that have tried to suggest that being woke is a bad thing, being attentive to issues that our society is wrestling with. In fact, they've sort of suggested if you go woke, you may go broke. We're here to tell you that's bullshit. And the data shows that that's true. So the Edelman Trust Barometer, Gen Z expects action. They are looking for brands and companies to be a part of solving the problems that our society wrestles with. So for those who suggest that somehow being woke or brands being engaged and involved in helping address the issues of the day is somehow bad for business, it's what consumers expect.
And when brands do this right, it's not only what consumers expect, but it's what actually they're willing to engage more with. So when you look at the data, when brands take a stand in the right way on societal issues, you'll find it drives loyalty. People are 4 times more likely to engage with a brand, a product, or a service and buy that product or service if brands put their values out there and take a stand in a clear way. And of that group, people are also twice as likely to pay more for that product or service. So it's the opposite of go woke or go broke. Really, doing good is good for business.
And while this data is relatively new, the insight really isn't. Our co-founder, Ben Cohen, our company was founded in 1978 in a dilapidated petrol station in Burlington, Vermont. And early on, Ben had this insight that really the strongest bonds that our company or any brand can create with your consumers, at Ben & Jerry's, we call them fans. The strongest bonds you can create is not just around a product transaction, pulling a pot of Ben & Jerry's out of the freezer at the market, but is around a shared set of values. If you think about the brands that you are most loyal, that you are most keen about, they are often brands where you have a connection around something the brand represents. So the data shows us that that's true, but Ben knew this a long time ago, and it's been part and parcel of the way in which we've built this company.
And what does it look like if you're going to do this stuff right? So if you're going to engage with your Gen Z or whichever audience in the right way, what does it look like? And we think at Ben & Jerry's there's a big difference between purpose campaigning, or CSR, and brand-led activism. In purpose campaigning, typically it starts with a survey to find out what your consumers care about. So what do they care about? Then marketeers come along and they try to emotionally connect you with that issue. And then you might ask NGOs or charities, hey, how can you be of service to us and make our brand look better? And the goal of these campaigns is nearly always driving brand equity.
So, and I would suggest there's a little bit of risk in this, right? Because the company or brand is focused on what's a value or cause or issue that my consumer base cares about. It doesn't tell you something about the company or brand. So our approach is quite different. In many ways, the creative output can look very similar, but we start at a very different place. Our work, using our platform, our tools, to be advocates for progressive social change, don't start with who are our consumers and what do they care about. It starts with what are our values? What are the things we believe? What's the change we seek to make in the world? And then we want to build an emotionally compelling campaign that encourages people not only to consume a piece of content, but ultimately to take action focused on making change in the world. Now, we have the data, and we're going to share some with you here in a minute that shows when we do this, when we're focused on authentically driving change, it accrues big rewards to the brand. It does both of these things at the same time, but you have to start with what's the change you seek to make in the world. So we're going to give you 4 rules to think about how to approach this from a brand side. So, rule number 1. Many marketers and brand people may have heard the term that it's time to get off the sidelines. I think we're here to tell you today that there are no longer sidelines, that ultimately you have to pick a side. Anyone familiar with this recent case? So let me just start by saying I'm not here to pick on any brand or company or suggest that we're any more clever than anybody else. But I think it's important to look at these issues because I think what we don't want is people to take away the idea that taking a stand on LGBTQ or trans rights is a bad idea. I'd suggest that it's not. Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch has a long history of supporting the LGBT community. For more than 30 years, they've had a very engaged employee research group. They had done Pride-themed cans before. In fact, they've been very strong proponents in the US for a landmark piece of legislation called the Equality Act that would create legal protections for LGBTQ people. This was, I think, an attempt to be inclusive, to expand the reach of the brand. You will know that they received a very loud, but I might suggest relatively narrow pushback on this piece of creative. The way in which it was handled, I would say, did not turn out particularly well. Bud Light in the US has a household penetration of roughly 50%. So roughly 50% of folks under the age of 50 have consumed a Bud Light in the last 3 months. It is also true that 80% of Americans support legal protections for the LGBT community. So taking a position like this, I would suggest to you, was not particularly controversial. I would posit that the reason this was a problem was not because the brand took a stand, it's ultimately that they didn't take a stand, that in the face of pushback, they remained silent. They weren't willing to stand up in this instance for the value that they were willing to associate themselves with originally. The Senior Director of Programs and Corporate Advocacy at the Human Rights Campaign, the leading advocate for LGBTQ rights in the US, said they had a moment to really stand up and demonstrate the importance of their values, and they really fell short in this instance.
Rule number 2. Generally, it's better to be talked about than not talked about. So at Ben & Jerry's, for nearly the past decade, we've been using our platform to advocate and protect the rights of refugees and people seeking asylum. At Ben & Jerry's, we've been very clear, concise, and loud and proud about our view on the government's hostile environment policy towards people on the move, and also the dangerous rhetoric that the government uses towards people seeking asylum. We have put this statement out, many statements out, whether it's saying that we don't agree with the Rwanda plan or that the environment is very hostile. And we've stood up for what we believe in. For many people, headlines like this that really put the Home Secretary against Ben & Jerry's would be a crisis comms issue, something that most corporates would absolutely hate. From our vantage point at Ben & Jerry's, this isn't a disaster at all. This is us using the platform that we have to put an issue on the map in a way that NGOs or movement builders might not be able to do alone. And the debate that it stirs is worth it for us if people have drawn attention to an issue and might take action. And of course, whilst when we make this kind of issue, with any progression comes pushback, and there'll be some people who are less likely to buy Ben & Jerry's because our position is so clear, there are those who know what Ben & Jerry's stand for and know what we believe, who are more inclined to buy our ice cream. So as you lose people by being clear and not playing it safe, you gain people who know exactly what you stand for. So here it shows that people went on to buy us. And this was one of the comments that we made, calling out the lack of humanity for people fleeing war, climate change, and torture. And we don't do it for this brand equity driver. We do it in partnership with the movement to drive change. But what this shows is that it resonates with our audiences. When we make these clear statements, people understand who we are and what we stand for, and then move towards us. Thanks. And what you can also see from Ben & Jerry's is that we have nearly 20% of share of posts across all ice cream, but we have a massive over 60% share of engagement. So we over-index on engagement. And you might ask yourself why that is. Well, if you've ever followed Ben & Jerry's on Instagram, you'll see that you have one moment it's a really fun post about ice cream or about a recipe to make a sundae, and the next minute it's a really strong message on racial justice, refugee rights. And that mix of content, the fact that we don't just stand for selling a product, is more interesting and therefore drives more engagement.
So, rule number 3. The job isn't to say what's popular, it's to make popular what needs to be said. So 2020, the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer was not just a sort of seminal moment in the movement for racial justice and civil rights in America. In many ways, it was an important moment for how corporate citizenship was viewed. Companies and brands in the US and really around the world felt the need to sort of speak out and speak up on issues of racial justice. That came both from employees who work inside of corporations and brands, as well as from society outside. Now, we, within about 72 hours of the murder of George Floyd, working with a constellation of groups and partners that we have worked with over the years on issues of racial justice, helped us put together what was a very clear statement. And I would suggest it was a statement that in many ways contrasted most other corporate statements. Words matter. It's important not just to say something, but how and what you say is important. So I just want to take a quick moment, and you may have read it while I was talking, just to highlight some of the kind of language that we used, language that the movement uses. We're reflecting the partners and allies that we work with in the world. So, what happened to George Floyd was not the result of a bad apple. It was a predictable consequence of a racist and prejudiced system and culture that's treated black bodies as the enemy from the beginning. In addition to this statement, we also lifted up a policy platform that our friends and allies in the movement were promoting, which included the United States apologizing for slavery, instituting a program of reparations, passing national fundamental criminal justice reform. We were very clear about both the problem in very stark and real language that reflected the movement and the partners that we work with, and we offered up their policy platform using our power and platform that we have. And again, not to pick on anybody, but there was a sea of sort of corporate statements that were white text on a black background. The National Football League in the US put out a statement that literally didn't even use the term race or racism to describe the issue, because I'm assuming they were concerned about being controversial. This statement is the biggest thing we ever did. It drove 3.5 million hits to the website. the time on site was 4x the typical time on site. People read and engaged with what this was. It had 1.2 billion earned media impressions, and it really helped sort of set the standard for how companies take a stand on issues like this. And finally, one of our movement partners, Jamie Henn, who helped co-found a global 350.org global climate advocacy group, really summed it up better than I think I could, that we have a huge megaphone, and unlike some other companies and brands, we're not afraid to use it. We help our movement partners reach new audiences, and as you saw on Kerry's slide, we're not afraid of putting pressure on key decision makers.
Which brings us to rule 4. It's better to be intensely loved by some than indifferent to everyone. There's probably not a day that goes by where we don't see a boycott Ben & Jerry's post onto our socials. But if your words don't move people, they don't matter. So I think what we know about being clear and concise in our statements, as we've said before, it's not why we do it, but we know that it moves people both to take action for social issues and they're more likely to put you into their basket. It drives this brand loyalty when you connect with people not only over ice cream, but over an idea, over a shared vision for the future.
It's counterintuitive, I think, that taking a position on issues that could be controversial lead to the kind of data that we've shown you. But it is true, and for Ben & Jerry's, we're now a company, in 38 countries around the world.
Yep.
This company has grown consistently year over year over year since it was founded in 1978. And we are one of the largest ice cream companies in the world. And despite having a clear political point of view, right, we would say, no surprise here, we sit on the left side of the political spectrum. But what's interesting is in a recent survey among a number of leading well-known brands, both in the UK and in the US, we are seen as objective. So people don't find the way in which we're engaging in these issues divisive. They see us as objective. And these brands include brands like Tony's, Dove, IKEA, Starbucks, Nike. And so this way of engaging is seen as credible. And that's really interesting, right? At a time when there are critics of politicians and policymakers and a lack of trust, increasingly brands are being seen as credible actors on these issues. So with that, let's leave you with the 4 rules. It's better to be intensely loved by some than indifferent to everyone.
It's better to be talked about than not talked about.
The job isn't to say what's popular, it's to make popular what needs to be said.
And finally, it's better to be intensely loved by some than indifferent to others.
Those are 3 of the 4 rules.
Did you drop one?
But with that, one typo, we'd like to...
Oh, yeah. It's fine.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.